Chapter 7. The Mystic's Warning. The now bonded duo, found mutual respect at last, were suddenly startled. Juliu caught another fleeting glimpse of light flashing in the foliage on the opposite bank. In his peripheral vision he swore that he saw a blade shimmering amongst the dense greenery. "Look on the other side of the river," Juliu whispered to Kai. "I know, lad. I've been watching this unseen stalker for nearly a day," Kai replied. Looking perplexed and quite annoyed by this revelation, Juliu responded, "Why didn't you say anything to me before?" Kai replied, "Because I didn't want you to feel like you were in any danger. Listen, I can tell that is a man roughly your height and is not all that gifted with physical strength, so he is no immediate threat to either you or myself." Juliu had learned to trust Kai and his quick assessments of danger, so he let his original annoyance pass. "We will let this unknown spy think we are his prey. However, he's our captive for as long as we let him track us," Kai whispered with a plotting smile on his face. "He can't cross the river anywhere along these banks, so he's no threat as of yet. So let's see how far we can draw him upstream, shall we?" Kai knew of a crossing point further upstream to their position. Towards its source, the river became a narrow and fast-flowing torrent that could be crossed easily. They set off in the direction of the distant hills where the Santic originated. A quick pace was set by Kai, and Juliu kept up, trying to keep his gaze away from the other bank. He did feel a pang of dread deep in his stomach. His anxieties were born from his time with San, knowing that all are not quite how they seem to be out here. Yet they continued on their path along the Santic, making good time. The source lay about a day's march upstream, and by the early evening they were beginning their climb uphill. Further they climbed, the trees started to give way to barren, rocky escarpments. Below, the Santic seemed to be a lot more alive with youthful vigour, flowing in the fast foaming bursts as it forced its way downhill. At this point the river had narrowed to just over 20 feet across. The sides became a jagged gorge, eroded into bare rock. An old river that had carved out its course over many centuries. Over the span of about 10 minutes, the waters began to slow. The rushing cacophony of the churning river slowly dulled. A pathetic trickle remained of water that now slowly tumbled down the rock, settling into pools in the gorge. For a brief few moments, the river Santic ran dry. "Well, what has happened to the water?" inquired a bemused Juliu. "Oh, I was afraid of this, lad," replied Kai, stopping to catch his breath. "Keep your eyes upstream, Juliu. If I'm correct, this river will start to flow again very soon, but not with water." Fearful of what he would see, Juliu cast his eyes uphill with no idea what would happen next. The Santic slumbered in its temporary hibernation for a few more minutes, until an audible rumble echoed through the steep stone valley. A disgusting smell filtered through the mountain air that stopped them both in their tracks, an odour so foul that their eyes started to itch. With first a gurgle, then a bellow, the river returned with vengeance. Over the crest of a rocky outcrop above them, a large slop of debris started to tumble over the precipice. Mud, trees and rocks all churned up into a soup of flowing depravity. In this cocktail of decay, Juliu spied bones. So many bones, all jumbled amongst the rotting elements of nature that littered the steep canyon below. The rattling soup of death became more dense as the flow started to fill the canyon. More and more bones joined in the flow. Skulls bobbed and smashed in the violent tide. Then tumbling over the highest point of the gorge fell a complete corpse, battered and twisted, no doubt caused by its journey downstream. Another followed, then another, until the Santic was covered in a disgusting crust of death. The bodies became fresher as the deluge passed by. These corpses were stripped naked and bound into a terrifying shape, tied from their wrists to their ankles from behind, forming a crooked triangle shape. As each body hit the rocky outcrops on the side of the gorge, sickening thuds followed by loud cracks of their bones. The percussive drum roll could be heard reverberating throughout the valley. It sounded like damp wood burning on a fire, crackling and snapping. The necks hung low into the debris soup as they passed Jilu and Kai. Pathetic broken remains, echoing a humiliating death emanating from upstream. Stunned and backed against the highest rocks they could find, Kai held back Jilu to stop him from slipping and tumbling into the decomposing river of nightmares. For hours they watched in complete silence, watching the flow of death pass them by, until one last broken body flopped over the ridge into the gorge. It fell with a slap. It danced in the currents like it was still alive, then clear water started to flow again in a high-pressure waterfall into the mire. The Santic looked impatient in its manner, like it was clearing its throat after vomiting. "Kai," whispered Jilu. I know," Kai replied. They looked on as this tide of humanity flowed ever onwards down the valley, pursued by a pristine clarity in the river, catching up with the death, intent at cleansing its banks. The river Santic's bubbling rapids returned as the fresh water retook its territory in the valley. Soon no trace of any mortal remains could be seen below in the gorge. "I know what we've witnessed here, lad. It is black magic, however this magic is not by the hand of any can spirit. This has a human touch, and I know it." The smell of decay and death passed in the air, and finally the crisp air atop the mountainside drew down the valley. This clean fragrance was a rejuvenating change from the macabre stench that had infiltrated their noses. The river Santic suddenly disappeared into the hillside, a dell covered in moss and mould surrounded by what looked like an insignificant puddle of fresh muddy soil. The gloopy soil bubbled and undulated as the Santic sprung from the mouldy earth. They had finally reached the source, the spring from whence the Santic was born. Around the entrance to the gloom of the dell there was a ring of what looked like small yellow stones, but on closer inspection they soon discovered a grisly picture. They were teeth. Human teeth. Hundreds of them in a deliberate circle made Kai hesitate. However, he reached into his pocket and drew out the tooth he found in Sand's empty grave. "Stand way back, Jilu," said Kai forcefully. "This is no magic trick." Kai threw the tooth into the centre of the circle where it vanished into the gloopy mud. Ripples in the water, oozing from the mud, started to emanate from the centre. The spring base sunk in the middle. A figure rose slowly into the light. He made no sound as he appeared. Who was this water-dwelling mystery? Almost hovering, caked in disgusting earth and shit-smelling jelly. Kai advanced and spoke. "Cal, my old friend. Can you hear a voice from the past that you remember?" He held his hands out once again in a gesture of peace to this muddy beast from below. Backing off slowly, Kai took Jilu's arm. They stood behind the first rock they could find. The mud-covered figure began to shake frantically. It reminded Jilu of a dog coming in out of the rain, shaking itself dry. A shower of mud and clay were thrown off into the air in all directions, narrowly missing the pair, sheltering behind the tall rock they leant against. Looking on, Jilu saw an old and very frail man, with long grey hair, although it was stained a green tint from the surrounding moss in the dell. "That voice I know too well. Is it spoken from beyond to my dell? Are you my old company under the moon, or has my enemy returned all too soon?" Jilu stood in confinement looking at Kai, but Kai started to approach with a little apprehension in short steps. "You stay there, lad. This man is known for being over-dramatic," said Kai. I never would have guessed, replied Jilu in a sarcastic but worried tone. It is I, your brother Kai, bound under the moon with you. I seek your guidance. I know what you speak is true. The wizened man now levitated roughly a foot off the ground. He hovered perfectly still in silence. His eyes rolled back into his emaciated skull. Who is your silent guest? Friend or enemy? Does he come in jest? Has he come to seal my doom? Or does he live within our gloom? Kai beckoned to Jilu to come forward with a hurried hand gesture. Speak, laddie. For fuck's sake, make it rhyme. Do it, please. Kai seemed to be genuinely worried, so Jilu responded quickly. I am Jilu, bloodbound to Kai. He saved my life and opened my eyes. Our journey's crossed by the shoreline. It will continue until the end of time. Nicely done, Kai interjected. With a loud splat, the old man dropped to the ground with a smile on his lips. Come here, my dear boy. How have you come to cross paths with an old bastard like me after all this time? Kai embraced his apparent friend from the past with a great jocular laugh. Come and meet my friend Jilu, said Kai. The old man outstretched his hand in greeting. Well then, young lad, any friend of old Kai here is a brother of mine. My name is Kalna, but you can call me Cal. They shook hands with a bounce that nearly lifted Jilu off the ground. Kai explained their adventures and experiences over the last couple of days. Kai, my old friend, this has been a month of such terrors, Cal started. I saw flames from Seeper and smoke from the Lek. Hordes of canned drones have tried to cross the river here, who I quickly dispatched. Yeah, I believe we encountered some of your trespassers on our journeys here, Kai said with a chuckle. In fact, I know we've been followed on our journey on the riverbank, Kai confirmed. He looks very haggard, and we know he has at least one metal weapon. And what is our new acquaintance's assessment of this would-be spy? Replied Cal, beckoning to Jilu. I have already encountered a spy from the Khan. He nearly betrayed me. If it wasn't for him dying after eating a poisonous fruit, I would have burned only days ago in Seeper, replied Jilu. Ah, my friend, you have survived Seeper. I know not one soul in these lands that has in recent times ever to escape that labyrinthine metropolis of the damned, Cal exclaimed. Tell me, what was the name of the spy who tried to harvest you, lad? He asked inquisitively. He said his name was San, replied Jilu. San convinced me he was a slave who had escaped his keepers. This wretch was probably on a mission for the Khan for weeks, Kai interjected. Looking for a wayward and lowly soul to harvest after failing at collecting anyone stronger. Hey! Exclaimed Jilu. Ah, he meant no malice, laddie, replied Cal in a rough yet calming tone. What old Kai was suggesting was that San was scared that he could be punished for not securing his bounty for Seeper's furnaces. Cal produced a tooth from San's grave and examined it closely. He pondered for a moment and pronounced, Our dead friend here was not killed by accident, showing the tooth to Kai. He was poisoned by a tree that bears the fruit Karmika, I'm sure of it. Kai had speculated that this was the cause of death before Jilu on the beach by Lek. However, he presumed it was accidental. A tree planted in that close proximity to the old blood-soaked battlefields is not coincidence. Cal then showed the tooth to Jilu. See how this tooth is engraved with the letter Q? This is the mark of a traitor, lad. They summoned his bones to Seeper as a failure. This may be because he shared his song with you. Or maybe because they fully believed you pair had struck up a real friendship. Jilu turned to Kai. How would the Khan know that San would pick fruit from that particular tree? Kai turned to Cal. A Khan spy, you believe? Cal mused for a second. All those you saw floating dead were spies, obvious and brash in their doings. I caught them all over the course of a month. They're all dumb and not worthy of the job harvesting. The poor bastards who burn. Jilu asked intriguingly, did the Khan plant that tree as a trap for San? Yes, lad, replied Cal. He probably only had a diluted potion made from the fruit to lure his victims, but I guarantee he never saw the tainted fruit picked fresh from a tree. Best thing for him, really. If I'd caught the little shit in his lands, I would have broken him in half myself and added him to the next tide down the Santic. Gelus wondered how someone so frail-looking could mangle someone in such a horrific way. However, seeing his access to some sort of sorcery, he sensibly didn't want to question Cal and his possible strength. I warn you now, Kai, this is an omen, I am sure. Never have I seen so many agents of the Khan moving at once in this way. There are some vile times approaching, I am sure. Cal took Kai aside and whispered to him. Be very wary of this tracker who follows you. He's obviously more than a drone. He is clearly much more skillful at following his prey. I have heard tale, Cal continued, using some very careful and delicate interrogation, of seekers directly from the stronghold above the city in the West Mountains. The old road to High Canna has been resurfaced, leading to the Embers. So the Embers are real. I always believed them to be a legend. You're correct, Kai, my friend. Thousands, possibly millions of souls dwell in the Embers. I predict this is a vast stock of fodder to use as an army. What the sudden reason for war escapes my isolated mind, yet I know the answer lays somewhere. Jilu spoke up and asked, where shall we look to search for more information, Cal? Well, Jilu, my new friend, I recommend that you head southeast, replied Cal. Across the Sea of Lek, you must gain entry into the now sealed city of Well.